Hello, and thank you very much for joining us today. My name's Deborah Garlick from Henpicked Menopause in the Workplace and author of the book Menopause, The Change for the Better. And today's session's all about menopause and nutrition. And I'm joined by my wonderful friend, Sally Leach from Henpicked Menopause in the Workplace and Antonia de Gier from Hormone Health. Now, this is a popular subject and I'm going to be taking a lot of notes too, as I know Sally is. So welcome, Antonia. I think we're just trying to find Antonia's. Welcome, Antonia.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Deborah.
And we were having such a chat before these sessions and today about this sort of topic because it's so popular, isn't it? You know, we all want to know why things are changing for us. And, you know, we were talking just earlier about how shape changing and things that we did before to lose those extra pounds before we went on holiday, or, you know, being able to drop a dress size by Saturday to get in that little black dress. Things just don't work in the same way that they used to. So I'm really keen to understand menopause and nutrition. How does what we eat make a difference to us during the menopause?
Well, I think it's really important to start with the fact, Deborah, that we all, as you say, worry about our weight. Perhaps that's our prime concern as we reach this stage. And it is an important one. Additional weight is not great for our heart health, obviously, as we know. It can put extra strain on our joints and our bones, etc. But I think a lot of us worry about what we actually look like. And I know that my colleague and friend Nigel Denby touched on the whole weight management aspect when he did his webinar with you. And I would like to just perhaps look at a slightly different area of it, which is looking at the food groups that are so important to support us during these transition years. So not necessarily just how we lose weight, but the foods that are important. I think, as you say, over the years and perhaps over the decades, we stop eating certain food groups. We've all heard of people who have tried the keto diet or the Atkins diet, for example. That's generally cutting out the carbs. I think a lot of us of a certain age have perhaps been fat phobic. You know, we've been really scared to eat certain fats and we've gone low fat as opposed to low carb. And that generally just means that we're bringing in much more sugary type foods. So I'd really like to look at the three big food groups, which is what we call the macronutrients to start with. And then perhaps how the really smaller food groups, so that's the vitamins and the minerals, which we call the micronutrients, also help to support all of our systems.
That's amazing. And what somebody's just put a comment in chat saying that never worked for me before. I think they're referring to me saying trying to drop a dress size by Saturday. We're all really, really different. But what I'm hearing from you then, just to take it from the diet and then what should be in our diet, is maybe this isn't a time for us to try some of those crazy
Absolutely.
Very, very restrictive.
Yes. And I think, Deborah, as you and I were just chatting about, it's not a time for a quick diet or a quick fix or a new fad. I think there's a real balance between finding this acceptance that we are in a different stage of our life, and that can be positive as well. So it's really important to remember that it's a positive time. Whilst we're going through our anxieties and our body changing shape, etc. And I think we want to look at really literally nourishing our bodies. And I'm not talking about over consuming calories, because portion control, for example, is still very important. But I am talking about trying to get the right foods into the body to support every system.
That's a really good point, isn't it? So, you know, once we appreciate that we are in a different phase of our lives,
absolutely,
different habits rather than short-term fixes, other way. And actually, whilst I was sort of thinking about, so obviously this is a personal thing with me, coming out of Christmas, coming out of holidays, etc., all of us coming out of COVID, weight management is only one part of all of this, isn't it? It's
absolutely
all nourishing our bodies and thinking about longer term health as well.
It really is. And I think that the key thing to hold on to is that for the majority of us, if we can get our food right, the cravings reduce, the blood sugar spikes and dips can become much more level, our energy can improve, our mood can improve, our sleep can improve. And so all of these things actually have a knock-on effect as to how we're feeling. And that can come as a positive, absolutely.
Okay, well, I'm game on for that then. We're going to jump straight into the practicals then.
Perfect.
What do we need to do?
Yeah, so I think if we look at the three main food groups, so I'm talking about protein, I'm talking about good fats, and I'm talking about the good carbohydrates that we call the complex carbohydrates. So if we start with protein, for example, we know that our muscle mass starts to decline from the age of approximately 35. And if we don't have muscle, then in general, we'll have more fat. We need muscle, as we know, to help us and to help. We also need the protein to help build our bones, to maintain our hair and skin strength, etc. The other important thing with proteins is that they are the building blocks for our neurotransmitters. So that's sending the signals of how we want our hormones to work, for example. So very important for our memory, for our mood, for example. So that's why really good quality protein is important. It also helps, as I mentioned earlier, to try and balance our blood sugar so that we're not having these sort of blood sugar lows where we're craving perhaps a sugary snack, and then we end up having something sugary with a cup of coffee, for example, which sends our blood sugar straight up, and then we're back to square one because it's gone up and then it comes down again. And that's what can affect our mood swings, for example, our weight gain. And what protein does is really help to slow down that digestion, that energy process. And that's why it's so important. Helps to give us a much more sustained level of energy.
Can I ask you a quick question about protein? Because I get what you're saying about it fuels the important things in like the neurotransmitters and balancing our hormones and our blood sugar, so we're less likely to crave.
That's it.
But for some of us, you know, when it comes to, are we supposed to be having protein at every meal then? Is that?
I would say if there is one golden rule of any of our nutritional advice, it is to have protein with every meal. And can I say, Deborah, I have seen so many clients who either skip breakfast, especially at our age, you know, they're trying time-restricted eating, they're trying to restrict their calories, and they are not having breakfast, or they're having a quick cup of coffee, or they're having a breakfast based without any protein. So a quick piece of toast, for example, or, you know, heaven forbid, something with your coffee that you get from the coffee shop. And I think we've forgotten the importance of having really good protein in the morning. So I'm talking about eggs, for example, salmon, nuts, seeds, with our full fat yogurt. And it doesn't have to be a huge portion, but just something, or an unsweetened nut butter, for example, with oat cakes, something like that, just to get you going in the morning and to get those blood sugars starting on a really good even keel.
And are all proteins the same? I mean, you know, and when you say protein, you said eggs, I think meat, but of course there's lots of vegetarians and vegans.
Yes.
How do we make sure, you know, what would we go for if it's not the meat or the eggs?
Then I think there are certain cheeses, for example, and if some people are not eating dairy, I know that. So there are certain cheeses such as Manchego, for example, or Osso Irati. These are not dairy foods. Vegan, of course, there's tofu. There are a lot of vegan alternatives now. I don't have any judgment as to whether people are vegetarian or vegan. I think it is important to say that, again, at our age and stage, it is important to have a really vast group of protein, and that, where possible, that would include good quality meat, lean protein such as chicken, for example, grass-fed meat, so an occasional steak is actually very good for us. But we've got nuts and we've got seeds, and we've got eggs, as I say, if you're non-vegan. So I think variety is key.
And back on the proteins, you mentioned yogurt earlier, and the words I heard before it was full fat. Is that like the full?
Yeah. Yes, so that would be a Greek yogurt, for example, a live yogurt, also really good for your gut health as well, which if we've got time, we can come on to. Because again, the low fat or reduced sugar, they always have, if they've had the fat taken out of them, they've had something else put in them. And that will generally be more sugar or a sugar substitute, for example. And I think it's really important to think, is this food giving me any benefit? Not, is it low fat? Is it low calorie? But is it giving my body the right nutrients that I need?
Right, that's wonderful. So, and we'll come on to portion size later. So you mentioned that was protein. And I know you're big on good fats.
Good fats, yes. And that was the next one that I wanted to come on to. Because again, there are certain fats that we can't make in the body, and we do need those fats. So I think it's really important to remember at this stage is that cholesterol is the precursor for all our sex hormones. So that's our estrogen, for example, our progesterone, which, as we know, are the important reproductive hormones. And these are what decline and really start to fluctuate when we're coming into the menopause. And we need fat in order to metabolize these hormones. So that's the very first thing, not to be afraid of eating fat. Not only do they help in the synthesis, but they're also very important in balancing our hormones. And that is perhaps the key, again, in the perimenopause years and then the menopause. In the perimenopause, our hormones are fluctuating like crazy. And it's important to get the ratio right of our estrogen to progesterone. And that's why eating the good fats is so important. They can also help with our satiety response. So that's, you know, knowing when we're actually full, when we've had enough to eat, that can help to signal that, no, actually, we have had enough. So again, quite helpful in appetite control. And I think also looking at the more physical symptoms, good fats can have an anti-inflammatory effect on the body. So when we start to get quite a lot of sort of joint pain, aches and pains, etc., those good fats can actually really help with that as well. So
what am I putting on my plate that would be a good fat?
So on your plate, you would be putting, there's quite a lot of repetition here, and it comes down to the Mediterranean diet. So avocado, for example, oily fish, very, very important. So salmon, mackerel, sardines, for example, all of those sorts of food. And then for the for everybody, but the vegetarians and the vegans, again, the nuts, the seeds, and their oils as well. So sesame seeds, sesame oil, for example, rapeseed oil, not just olive oil. There are plenty of other foods and oils that we can enjoy.
And are these, because I had a bag of peanuts yesterday and I was looking at them and thinking, well, they're salted, but they're peanuts.
Yeah.
You know, are all nuts and seeds the same, or is it a matter of, because you mentioned they have to be raw, or?
Well, I mean, in an ideal world, obviously, they would be raw and unsalted. And I'm thinking of Brazil nuts, for example, almonds, cashew nuts, any of those. I would, however, say don't beat yourself up too much. If you're craving a sort of a snack, an early evening snack, for example, then having a salted cashew is going to be more beneficial than having a crisp.
Okay.
Because it's still got goodness in it. So ideally you would have your raw unsalted nuts, but we're all human, and if you really want sort of a salty snack, then having salted nuts would be better than having Doritos or something like that.
And be very specific, butter or margarine?
Well, I would go butter, because it's still natural. It is natural, but it's not an essential fat, so that's quite important too. So I would say olive oil, and then butter, and then margarine.
Wonderful. So that's the second one. That was protein, good fat,
Absolutely. And then carbohydrates, I think, which poor carbohydrates have had quite a raw deal, haven't they, over the last few years? I think there have been so many diets that have come onto the market, and they do work in a quick fix situation. As you say, perhaps in our 30s or 40s, we needed to get into a dress on Saturday night and we cut the carbs, and it has worked. But unfortunately, our metabolisms change. And I think the single most thing to remember is that carbohydrates are our main energy source. And we all feel tired at the best of times, and we all have busy lives. And actually, we do need these food groups to help us. Now, when I'm talking about carbohydrates, I'm talking about what we call the complex carbohydrates, which again are much more slow releasing of their energy. So when I'm talking about those carbohydrates, I'm talking about whole wheat bread, for example, whole wheat pasta. I'm talking about rye bread, and then oat cakes, for example. And then I'm talking about fruits and vegetables. I mean, I think, again, some people have become quite scared to eat fruit even, because they're thinking it's high sugar. Fruit is full of vitamins and minerals that we need at this stage in our lives. Also, within that food group, I would put fibre, which again is just so important to help us to eliminate any of the old circulating hormones that we want to get out of the system. It just helps our digestive system, helps with transit times, helps with the flow, and that's also very important.
Wonderful. So if we've got those three, thinking here of my plate, on average, so what would be my meal size? Because you mentioned earlier about our muscle mass changes.
Yes.
Muscle burns extra calories, so that's a double whammy, isn't it?
What burns extra calories?
Muscle mass.
Muscle, yes, absolutely.
As our muscles decrease, you kind of have to do your exercise to keep your muscles from
strength training, weight bearing exercise, absolutely.
Burning the calories. So portion size then of those three, is it equal portions?
Well, I would say, so you're looking at, if you start with your protein, you're looking at basically a chicken breast, for example, or a piece of salmon, or a couple of eggs, for example. And then, I mean, if you're looking at breakfast, if you perhaps have an egg with some avocado, and you could have some full fat yogurt, or with a few nuts and seeds, for example, and some fruit, then you're covering all of those bases. Or you can have your unsweetened nut butter, for example, on a couple of oat cakes, or sourdough bread, something like that. Scrambled egg, smoked salmon. That's your sort of your portion. So you don't want to go over. You don't want to overeat. But I can't stress enough that if you attempt to eat the right foods, after a couple of weeks, your body will really start to notice the difference and won't be craving the snacks. And if you are craving a snack, then, you know, I'm talking like 6 to 10 almonds, for example, is a snack, or a teaspoon of nut butter with a chopped apple for a snack. But for it's in an ideal world, we would have 3 balanced meals a day, and hopefully not needing to snack. But, you know, we all have a 4 o'clock craving sometimes. We're all, you know, it happens. So I think it's just really important to remember to have the protein with each meal and snack.
Wonderful, thank you. And what about these vitamins and nutrients you
So,
mentioned?
yeah,
Those portions.
absolutely. So if we sort of take it to the next step and we look at the micronutrients, so these are our vitamins and minerals. So these are our B vitamins, for example, our vitamin C, vitamin D, and then we're looking at the minerals. So that's magnesium, for example, selenium, and these help to support these bigger systems that I'm talking about. So our energy metabolism, for example, our moods, our actual synthesis of these neurotransmitters. So if we take one neurotransmitter, for example, acetylcholine, which is very important for our memory, that is made from a substance called choline. And we get that from our fish and our organ meats, for example, and our eggs. So B vitamins, for example, are a very good source of mood enhancing substances. So I'm talking green leafy veg, again, turkey, cottage cheese, those sorts of foods. Then if we look at magnesium, for example, that is very important as a muscle relaxant and therefore can also aid our sleep. So you quite often hear of people taking magnesium before they go to sleep. Magnesium sources are cashews, almonds, and again, the green leafy veg, so the spinach, the kale, etc. They're very important. I think if we're looking at blood sugar balance, as we've talked about, and weight management, then the minerals chromium and selenium are very important. Now, again, chromium you're going to find in whole grains, parsnips, for example, variety of nuts. Selenium, the big one, is Brazil nuts. And I'm, you know, again, I'm talking 2 Brazil nuts a day are going to give you the amount of selenium that would be ideal for us.
So should we take the multivits, or are you saying that if we look at those 3 macro ingredients and make sure that we're balancing it in that sort of way, we should be getting those supplements and nutrients?
So I would always start with the diet. So I think if we've got changes to make, then start with the food for sure. However, we do have to think about the things that our soil is just not as nutrient rich as it used to be, for example. And I am an advocate for supplements. I take a really good multivitamin, for example. And I think, again, it depends on the time of year. You know, we all know, we've all heard about vitamin D now is becoming much more important for the immune system, whereas it used to be vitamin C. And vitamin C is important, but so is vitamin D. And we can get that from sunlight, but it's quite important to supplement it, for example. And that's really important for our bone health, for example.
Okay, so start with our diet.
Some
things like vitamin D that you know, I think lots of people struggle with vitamin D deficiency.
Especially in the winter, obviously, and especially living somewhere like here.
Yes, that one might be more of a no-brainer, and then see where you get. So welcome, Sally Leach. I can see that there's lots of questions coming in, so I'll go on mute and hand over to you.
There are lots of questions and also lots of sharing. So as we always say in all of these sessions, thank you everyone for sharing, supporting each other. It is really appreciated. So a couple of key themes. There was quite a few questions around protein. One was around sources of protein for vegetarians, which I know you covered a bit, but a lot of people struggling to get enough protein, and whether it's like protein shakes or what are the ways that we can really enhance the amount of protein that we get into our diets?
Yeah, I think it's important to mention that I didn't mention earlier the pulses, for example, which are your lentils, for example, your chickpeas, kidney beans. So they're sort of in a little bit, if we had a Venn diagram, then they are coming in the carbohydrates and the protein section as well. So very important for vegetarians in particular, and vegans, and the meat eaters, because again, it's about variety. So I think really added those. Again, we talked about tofu, you know, the fermented foods, very good for gut health, also good protein sources.
Fantastic. And just on that, we've had a question around why sourdough bread was good for you, and what about probiotics? And I know
well, sourdough is just a different form of processing. So it's really if people are not very good at tolerating wheat, or their that's also another aspect. As we get a bit older, sometimes we can, and our hormones are changing, etc., we can develop a bit of a food intolerance to some foods, and some women find that wheat becomes slightly more aggravating to the digestive system, and find that sourdough, it's a choice. You know, if you're going for really good quality wholemeal bread, rye bread, sourdough, it's an individual choice.
Yeah. And also someone asked about probiotics.
Yes, probiotics are an excellent idea, either in supplementation, but again, we can get those in our food. I think probiotics are really important if you've actually been ill, if your immune has taken a hit, because our gut health is very closely linked with our immune health. So if, for example, we've taken antibiotics, then that can really kill our good bacteria as well as the bad bacteria in our digestion. So probiotics are excellent if we've had a bit of a hit. Again, in the winter, if we want to slightly boost our immune system, but we can get them from food sources, again, from fiber, from onions, garlics, from the fermented foods that I was just talking about, sauerkraut, for example. Kimchi is quite a popular one now that's on the market. So again, food first, supplements second.
Fantastic. There's been a lot of debate around full fat food with people with high cholesterol.
Yeah, well, it depends what type of food you're having, because the dietary cholesterol is not necessarily going to affect the bodily cholesterol, if that makes sense. So, for example, eggs get a really bad press where cholesterol is concerned, but they can also help. They have a substance in them called lecithin, which can actually help to bind what we call the bad cholesterol out of the body. But again, you know, I think if we're really looking at the essential fats, so that's the nuts, the seeds, the oily fish for the non-vegetarians, the oils, then that can be really helpful.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about the saturated fat, just like I'm not talking about the refined carbohydrates. So I'm not talking about processed foods, basically, so the saturated fat that's in biscuits, etc.
Okay. And someone asked whether dried fruit is any good.
Yes, I mean, again, it obviously has a higher sugar amount than fresh fruits, but again, I would say if you're really craving something, and again, have it with a few nuts. You know, have a few cashew nuts and a dried fig, or prunes are great. Raisins are another nutrient source. So I think if you're not having it just on its own, and you're really looking for a sugar hit, then it's not so bad.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And I know a lot of people are asking whether there's going to be a recording. And yes, we will share that after the session. So just really want to say huge thank you to everyone for joining in the questions, and I'll pass back to you, Deborah.
Thank you very much. And there's only one tiny one I've got left, Sally, because I was just looking at the questions and I found this fascinating. It is a quick one, Antonia. Couscous, what's that then?
Yes, well, couscous is a grain. That's a complex carbohydrate. Again, very good.
Wonderful, thank you. And everybody's sharing ideas and tips in the chat. And there are two questions around, or there was a few questions around good diets to follow and books. And the recommendations are BBC Food, Tim Spector and James Wong. So for those that, and I'm presuming they're all right, are they, Antonia?
Yes, I think so. Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So thank you for joining us today, and to our special guest, Antonia de Gier from Hormone Health. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I hope you come back and join us again, Antonia.
Well, thank you, Deborah. I would love to. It's been my real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to Sally Leach, as always, for checking the questions and answers and asking your questions. So please join us again, and thank you very much for joining us today. All the best.